So I want to give you a quick recap of Book 18. It's when we know Odysseus has returned to the palace and the suitors are all there, gathered again for a feast, eating his food. Um, and another beggar shows up named Iris, a younger beggar, and he's kind of put off by Odysseus, and he thinks that, Odysseus is taking some of his food and his place, and so he challenges Odysseus. And in the meantime, the suitors notice this, and they say, oh, well, isn't this fun? We'll get to see these two beggars fight, and whoever wins, we'll invite them to our table, and they'll have food, and we'll get rid of the other one. And this is an opportunity for Odysseus to actually perhaps intimidate the suitors in some way, because Pallas Athena works her magic again, as she has in the past, to make him look bigger and more muscular. So he rolls up his sleeves when Iris challenges him, and in one fell swoop he gets rid of him, and the suitors sort of take note and think, who is this old guy? And it is setting up a little tension, because when they realize that it's the great Odysseus later on in the poem, they may recall just how strong he was when he was disguised as the beggar. And so Pallas Athena does something else that gets this precursor of this bigger fight set up. And that is, she makes Penelope even more attractive. And so Penelope is more attractive to the suitors, and even Odysseus in a way. So it's building up the pressure even more. And she also does something else to Penelope. She puts it in her that she's going to get a little feisty with these suitors. And she says to them, she tells the story on page 384. It's a really lovely passage where she tells one of the suitors what her husband had said to her before he left for the Trojan War. He said, "Dear woman, I doubt that every Achaean under arms will make it home from Troy, all safe and sound. The Trojans, they say, are fine soldiers too, hurling javelins, shooting flights of arrows, charioteers who can turn the tide like that when the great leveler of war brings on some deadlock." So he's not sure that he'll be successful at Troy, or that even if the Achaeans are, that he'll be one of the ones fortunate enough to come home. After all, Achilles wasn't, and he doesn't know. So I cannot tell if the gods will sail me home again. Again, he's paying homage to the gods. It's up to the gods who wins the Trojan War. So he can't say what the gods' decision will be in that war. Or I'll go down out there on the fields of Troy. But all things here must rest in your control. So he's giving her the power when he's away to make her decisions about things. And he says, "Watch over my father and mother in the palace, just as now, or perhaps even more, when I am far from home. But once you see the beard on the boy's cheek," meaning once Telemachus has come of age, and there's, the beard can appear on his face, he's getting facial hair, "you wed the man you like and leave your house behind." So he's giving her that freedom to say, at some point I want you to be happy again, and I want you to be able to marry whoever you like, who's ever suitable, and then Telemachus will take over the land. And so she goes on to say to these suitors, "But none of you have really wooed me in any decent way. There's a time-honored way," she says, "of suitors locked in rivalry, striving to win some noble woman." That's in lines about 309 on. And she says, none of you are behaving that way. I mean, a suitor would bring gifts and certainly treat somebody with more respect if you, in fact, want to marry her. So Odysseus overhears this, and of course dressed as the beggar, but it says, "Staunch Odysseus glowed with joy to hear all this, his wife's trickery, luring gifts from her suitors." So even though, he's hoping that, of course, she's not going to marry one of them, he thinks it's quite wise of her to expect to get some gifts out of all of them before she makes the decision. And so when he's brought to the table, because after all they promised the winner of these two beggars who won the battle between the two beggars would be seated at the table and fed, he tells one of them that Eurymachus that after all, I know of the great Odysseus. He's already said he's traveled around, and he knows that Odysseus is actually not far from his homeland, and kind of saying, don't be surprised if Odysseus shows up and perhaps wouldn't like what's going on here. And he gets into a little bit of hassle with them. Meanwhile, Penelope has gone up to her room with all the gifts that the suitors had sent for gifts to be brought to her. And they're getting, the suitors are getting a little rowdy and obnoxious to Odysseus. So Telemachus takes over and he says, enough now. You've had food. He is my guest. And he sort of sends the suitors off to their own homes, and showing, I think, his growth. He's taking control, his maturity. And so there's this lovely scene in which the suitors toast the gods, and then they go off to their own homes. So even the suitors know enough to sort of give homage to the gods before leaving. And that will set up book 19, when Telemachus is alone with Odysseus in the great hall, and they can map out their plan to get rid of the suitors. So I'll be back with that in the next module.